we will now together take a look in the nuclear age, in the US intelligence community, and on some very important questions concerning these issues. So yeah, my presentation is called the Team B Experiment and its Strategic Aftermath, Controversies on US Nuclear Threat Assessment between Intelligence, Military and Government, 1976 to 1980. And to give you a basic understanding what Team B was, you can see at the right the report. On the left, you see Soviet ICBMs on the Red Square in Moscow in 1964. I have a very quick answer to this quick question. What was Team B? The answer is very short for now. In 1976, the CIA, under sustained pressure from critics of the taunt, was forced to conduct an experiment in competitive analysis as a kind of counter test to its own intelligence gathering. The people that participated in this experiment were called Team B. More info now. As you can see, I will talk in 5 parts about the topic. The first part is US national intelligence estimates as forms of military-civilian prognostics during the Cold War. Part 2 is diverging positions between CIA and military intelligence and Soviet estimates before and apart from Team B. Part 3 is Team B experimental report. Part 4 is aftermath Team B, and part 5 is conclusion. So the national intelligence estimates compiled during the Cold War by the US intelligence community under the leadership of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, provided analytics, estimates, and prognostics on topics related to national security and directly impacted military and political decision-making by government bodies. During this time, the intelligence community in the USA constituted a somewhat heterogeneous group with diverse perspectives depending on their affiliation with either civilian or military communities within the US. It included the intelligence services of the Department of State, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Energy, as well as the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, you remember yesterday, the respective intelligence subunits of the branches of the United States Armed Forces, and the CIA and the NSA and the FBI. The Office of National Estimates and its board coordinated and summarized this estimative form of gathering information, but the CIA and its director supervised the process and had the final say on the wording of the report. As early as the 1950s, these annual documents covered the nuclear capabilities, strategies, and intentions of the Soviet Union, and the question, the Soviets' position on a potential nuclear war, constituted here a major key element. Part 2, diverging positions between CIA and military intelligence and Soviet estimates before and part Team B. The early 1970s, or to be more precisely, the early and mid-1970s, with its changes in global security politics, brought about an increasing dissent among the authors of the NEIs as to the nuclear capabilities and intentions of the communist antagonists and as to how they should be assessed. These diverging positions went beyond the natural differences and internal rivalries for a bigger part of the funds available. The increase in quantity and quality of Soviet nuclear capabilities, the growing doubts on a mutual assured destruction doctrine, MAD, the slow but ongoing erosion of the US nuclear supremacy, and finally, the growing impact of the Soviets and third world countries drove a wedge between non-military and military intelligence services. Since the CIA were masterminding the operation, dissenting opinions of the various military intelligence services were relegated to the end of a paragraph or into a footnote of the NEIs. In 1976, the situation deteriorated further. NEI 1138-1976 was mainly based on the input from Team A, the CIA researchers, and notwithstanding the estimates from Team B, the inconsistencies in NEI 76 were mind-blowing. NEI 76 did not provide a clear analysis and assessment of the Soviet nuclear strategy, and even more importantly, did not deliver a common explanation for the reasons behind the massive increase in nuclear capacities. It became obvious that the individual intelligence units could not come up with compatible interpretations. One group of analysts qualified the Soviet nuclear armament primarily as an attempt not to fall behind the American progress and keep the strategic balance of power without aiming at surpassing the US and thus improving their chances of winning a potential confrontation. Another group believed the very contrary to be possible and even probable. And in their estimation, the Soviets were trying to reach war-winning capability. In their mindset, the Soviets' ultimate goal was not only to achieve equivalence with the US, but to surpass them in quantity, quality, and tactics. In the view of participants like the Assistant Chief of Staff, Intelligence, Department of the Air Force, the nuclear balance between the USA and the Soviet Union had already been destroyed in favor of the Soviet Union. As he claimed, quote, a realistic calculation of nuclear fatality exchange ratios in a war today would probably show the USSR emerging with considerably more than a 20-to-1 advantage, quote end. It became apparent that the interpretation of the Soviet strategic ambitions and capabilities had created a rift, primarily between CIA and military intelligence units. Rifts, which some critics also applied to the opposing group civilian versus military or liberal versus conservative. Daniel O'Graham, Lieutenant General of the United States Army, who worked for the Office of National Estimates, the CIA, as well as the head of the DIA, later assessed prevailing political ambience within the intelligence community, or more precisely the CIA, as anti-military. Quote, there are more liberals per square foot in the CIA than in any other part of government, quote end. Major General George J. Keegan Jr., representing Air Force intelligence within the NEI project, came to the similar conclusion, namely that the real problem lay in the politically inspired denial of reality within the CIA. When leaving active duty in January 1977, he said, quote, this grave imbalance in favor of Soviet military capability had developed out of a failure over the last 15 years to adjust American strategic thinking to Soviet strategy and out of the failure of the leadership of the American intelligence community to perceive the reality of the Soviet military buildup, quote end. These were harsh accusations. But how can these differences be explained? One solution could be, as one author argued in an internal CIA publication later in 1981, that the divergent conclusions of the military and civilian intelligence agency could most likely be explained by the practical view of each institution and in combination with the opaque nature of the Soviet threat. As he wrote, quote, put crudely, the services are socialized into judging everything in terms of military capabilities, while analysts at CIA, depending upon their particular office, display varying degrees of sensitivity to the political side of things. Individual analysts in each of these institutions, on the whole, are more sensitive to information that suggests to them that the Soviets see the world in the same way that their particular subunits of the bureaucracy do, quote N. Part 3, Team B experiment and report. The idea for the experiment with Team B originated on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, or short, PIFI-AP. This control unit was made up of a majority of conservative members since the Kennedy administration, and it was here that the growing criticism of the allegedly too optimistic analysis of America's position and Soviet strategic goals were first and loudly voiced. Their concept was to create a counter-NEI, drafted by outsiders with access to the same intelligence data, thus either having a second point of view or enforcing the hardliners' point of view. The PIFI-AP was hoping for a new angle, while officially the aim to independently widen the current perspective was communicated. While it took several attempts to overcome the resistance within the CIA and its director William Colby, the project was launched in the spring of 1976. President Gerald Ford, who was under strong pressure from détente critics like his rival Ronald Reagan, gave his approval, and the new director of the CIA, George Herbert Bush, set the experiment in motion. The CIA selected for Team B Richard Pipes, the leader and a Harvard historian on Russian history, Lieutenant General Danny Graham, US Army, retired, Paul Nietzsche, defense intellectual and politician, as well as 7 other men, basically all known for their hardline views on the Soviet Union and their military buildup. The analysis provided by the members of Team B argued that prior NEIs were strongly biased by the wishful thinking that Soviet nuclear strategy and American concepts of using nuclear arms were similar, and its makers had shied away from the conclusion that the enemy had fundamentally different ideas on war, peace, and the use of nuclear weapons. The experts under Pipe's leadership came to very different conclusions when they described Soviet actions to be of an offensive nature, especially where nuclear strategy was concerned. According to their judgment, the other side took advantage of the Americans' naive position. For the Soviets, détente, März, the SALT negotiations constitute proofs of weakness, which warranted punishment in the Soviet view of the world. As they wrote in the report, quote, the scope and value of Soviet strategic programs leave little reasonable doubt that the Soviet leaders are indeed determined to achieve the maximum possible measure of strategic superiority over the US. Their military doctrine is measured not in Western terms of assured destruction, but in those of a war-fighting and war-winning capability. It also posits a clear and substantial Soviet predominance following a general nuclear conflict. We believe that the Russians place a high priority on the attainment of such a capability and that they maybe feel that it is within their grasp, quote end. Team B also gave a harsh assessment of how intelligence was gathered and evaluated within the CIA. Voluntary ignorance of the Soviet mindset in ideology combined with replacing military ways of thinking with civilian concept of appeasement had resulted in the psychological self-deception of the civilian academics working in intelligence units. This process was called mirror imaging. On top of these shortcomings, the political positioning of the drafters had jeopardized an objective analysis of Soviet nuclear ambitions when sometimes unconsciously filtering or ignoring uncomfortable or even dangerous developments for fear of institutional and political repercussions. Team B qualified the input from the military intelligence units as mostly convincing and correct. The rational military approach to analyzing potential threats had not been the problem of the existing NEIs, they concluded. The real problem stemmed from the bureaucratic administration of the intelligence community, where the CIA and other civilian agencies exercised a politically motivated dominance, which had a net negative impact on the NEI's validity. As a result, American military expertise came second in the imbalanced and questionable rivalry with the bureaucrats' idealistic point of view, as Team B said. Part 4, aftermath of Team B. Despite the top secret classification, the main results of Team B's report were leaked to the press and made the headlines. On December 26, 1976, the New York Times published the alarming insights given by Team B and parts of the intelligence community on page 1. The readers learned that the fear of a massive threat to the nation's security from Soviet nuclear armament was growing among the intelligence community. In absolutely bloody discussions, the outsiders of Team B had crushed the analyses drafted by the CIA and passed a harsh verdict. A dispute that had previously been confined to internal rows within the intelligence community had now reached the public domain. And the situation became in the following time and years part of a political debate through bodies like the Committee on the Present Danger or the Coalition for Peace Through Strength. Obviously, the harsh criticism of its position and authority, which had been leaked to the press, did not go down well with the CIA, especially since the original idea behind the experiment had been to gain new insights and not to review the civilian intelligence process as a whole. The analysis provided by Team B were not groundbreakingly new, but underlined and sharpened ideas that had been present as an undercurrent within the military intelligence units for some time. The outsiders of Team B were not really outsiders either. A significant part of them had seen military service or was still active and shared the military intelligence services point of view. This change of perception regarding the acknowledgement of an existing threat and the gradually declining primacy of the civilian intelligence services is reflected in later NEIs, with transformations in form and content. NEI 11.4.77, for example, presents the different points of view as such without prioritizing them or pretending that the consensual interpretation had in general been reached at all. In another striking example, the summary part of NEI 1979, drafted after the invasion of Afghanistan and the subsequent breakdown of the SALT II negotiations, was not approved by the military intelligence services. The reasons for this unprecedented rebuke were communicated as follows. The holders of this view also consider the judgments outlined in the summary as shaped by US perceptions and strategic thinking, and not probably reflective of Soviet strategic objectives. The summary should emphasize that the Soviets are pursuing strategic nuclear capabilities for motives quite different from those of the United States. At government level, the influence of this dispute could be traced another way. Although the administration of Democrat Carter, 1977, both disbanded PIFI-AP and also opposed a repeat of the experiment, National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski and Secretary of Defense Sarah Brown adopted Team B's positions and arguments to a significant degree, leading to the passage of Presidential Directive 59 in 1908. This countervailing strategy replaced the MAD doctrine with a counterforce-oriented new nuclear strategy, which can be understood decidedly as a response to the nuclear threat posed by the Soviet Union as it was diagnosed by Team B. This new doctrine provided for the use of nuclear weapons against military targets in military and political command levels, and selectively, with the aid of modern reconnaissance systems, precise strikes against the Soviet Union leaderships. As you can see in this quote, and I'm coming to the end now, the influence of Team B's analysis and the shift in opinion inside the intelligence community and government was a direct influence on PD 59, as you can see here. Yeah. Moving on to the conclusions. The case of Team B illustrates the substantial differences between the civilian and military-based intelligence communities against the backdrop of thermonuclear stability and an increasingly unpredictable Soviet antagonism. On another level, the process shows how, in times of upheaval, formerly secret knowledge could be transformed into public knowledge in order to enter into direct competition with bodies of knowledge formerly considered secure. In this case, the analysis of the Soviet Union's nuclear strategic capabilities, intentions, and ways of thinking. Here, the developments touched very centrally on the question of the degree of militarization, not only of the intelligence sector of the United States, but also of the view of the potentiality, avoidance, and cause of a global thermonuclear conflict with the USSR towards the end of the Taunt. In this case, it can be stated that the military-based view ultimately prevailed at the political and governmental level. This was not least due to the fact that it was assumed that the Soviet Union itself shared precisely this perspective and not that of the civilian intelligence services. Thank you.